Hi friend, do you ever feel like standard leadership advice just doesn't work for you? Well, welcome to Leadership from Within. In this podcast, we will discover your unique leadership style. We dive into the world of MBTI and the Big Five. We shape leadership strategies that truly fit you. Join us on this journey to find out the one-of-a-kind leader you are. Let's get started. In today's episode, I spoke with Blair Butterfield, a ENFJ global leader in health information technology, whose 3-decade career has left an indelible mark on the industry. A Yale-educated visionary, he has been a crucial part of leadership teams at 5 innovative software companies and 4 influential boards across the globe. His exceptional roles include chairman at Wind River Advisory Group, member of the Healthcare Executive Network for LEK Consulting, and the president at Vital Health Software, now part of Philips Healthcare. Renowned for co-founding GE Healthcare's eHealth division and leading groundbreaking projects worldwide, his contributions have shaped the future of medical technology and global health infrastructure. To kick things off, I asked Blair how he developed his leadership style.
I think it's always evolutionary. I started out in roles where I had a lot to learn. I was fortunate to learn from great, brilliant minds in the industries that I worked in. Being focused on understanding the issues that the customer is facing, understanding more deeply the solution that the company I was with offered, and then being able to articulate that as well as could be conceivably done was always a key part of it. The ability to articulate and to understand, I think, can't be underestimated. And that ability grows as one's confidence grows and one's experience grows.
Next, I asked Blair about his core leadership principle. His response highlighted a strong focus on empathy. Individuals with a dominant feeling function, like ENFJs, are usually deeply in tune with emotions, both their own and those of others. They naturally empathize with others, often prioritizing emotional understanding in their decision-making process. Throughout this interview, you'll discover how empathy forms the bedrock of Blair's high-level leadership journey, influencing his roles on boards of directors and in international business settings.
I think my principles are informed by my life experience, which is to try to deeply understand the specific needs both of the customer and of the folks that I'm working with and work for me, and try and leverage those strengths in a way that contributes to a team effort to fulfill the customer needs. So I would call my leadership style empathetic. That's what it's been called by the folks that have worked for me. And I try to be collaborative, and I try to be understanding, and I try to be inspiring as well. So I would say those would be some of the key qualities that I try to bring to any role.
Next, Blair delves into how empathy plays a crucial role in navigating the diverse and complex dynamics of a board. When this skill is paired with traits like diplomacy, collaboration, and effective communication, it empowers an ENFJ to unite people. This unique blend facilitates constructive disagreement and problem-solving, guiding everyone toward a shared goal.
Yeah, a board of directors is a very interesting environment because you actually are the senior level of the corporation. You have the responsibility to the shareholders, and management actually reports to the board through the CEO. However, a board is typically made up of a diverse collection of individuals with widely varying experiences and skills and opinions. So it's an environment in which diplomacy is critical, trust is essential, and the ability to collaborate and communicate with people in a way that will get consensus on an issue is important because boards vote, and it has to be, in most cases, boards do strive for consensus. In cases where that's not achievable, then often a majority vote will win. But successful boards, long-term boards, happier boards tend to go for consensus. And so those skills that you mentioned, the ability to have more of an empathetic feeling relationship with others is critical because you can build the relationship on the personal level and then differ and disagree on the details of a specific issue without it becoming an unmanageable situation. You can actually agree to disagree, or you can actually have a robust conversation where eventually one of you will convince the other. And if that's not possible, then the board is dysfunctional, and that affects the culture of the entire company.
In the next part, Blair dives deeper into his approach. He explains how combining empathetic understanding with adaptability and a commitment to lifelong learning has been key to his success in international business. To start, he gives a brief overview of how this principle works in practice.
Certainly, if I don't speak the language of the country I'm in, that's a disadvantage. But again, one has to be open and humble and honest and not try to misrepresent yourself or your abilities. And I think that was something I always strive to do in any culture I was in, and to always be understanding and never be critical of something I didn't understand, and just to be kind and compassionate as much as possible to people. And so that was always in the forefront of my mind, is that I was an ambassador of my culture, so I needed to represent its good values and also be open to learning new things from the culture that I was now in.
To help illustrate how empathy plays a key role in resolving complex international challenges, Blair provides a specific example.
Let me give one example. So one of the projects I worked on for GE was in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years, and I would spend a significant amount of time there. And we were working very closely with senior government officials and also colleagues in Saudi companies that were partners to us. And what we understood from their way of doing business is that relationships were primary, that they had to actually know you and trust you and like you to feel comfortable giving their business to you. And so that always took precedence over any kind of details of a business project or business proposal. It was important to spend significant time with them, just getting comfortable with the relationship before bringing up those kinds of issues. And this was something that I enjoyed and actually was quite good at. And one particular example happened one day. One of my colleagues had done something which actually was not well received by the customer, by the Saudi officials that we were dealing with. And they, through a very polite, indirect communication through a back channel, let us know that they were not happy about what had happened. And my reaction was to go to the office of this specific Saudi official with one or two other colleagues, even though we had no appointment, and we would just wait there until they were willing to see us. And so we waited in the waiting room. We were all busy people. We had other meetings scheduled that we had canceled. We waited in the meeting room for 2 to 3 hours, as I recall. And then finally, we were invited into the office of the official to see them. And by that time, we had been forgiven because we had demonstrated our willingness to put the relationship first and to do whatever it took to apologize and make them feel noticed and important in our world. So that was an adaptation to their specific cultural context. Other cultures are entirely different. Some of the European cultures are very much more like the American culture, and it's all focused on business. It's focused on details. It's focused on accountability, keeping schedules, being on time for appointments, et cetera, et cetera. So one has to be cognizant of those differences and willing to understand the cultural context in which you're operating in order to be successful in those environments. And very often, we found that those who have had international experience, who have lived in more than one country, who have been exposed to multiple cultures, were just more able to make those transitions and not feel like a fish out of water or feel somehow out of place in those environments.
In the upcoming segment, Blair discusses how his empathetic understanding has been a key factor in overcoming culture challenges in international business. We've already touched on how ENFJs naturally possess empathy, but they bring much more to the table. Traits like adaptability, a strong sense of personal values, and a collaborative approach are just as crucial. Tune into this part to learn how these attributes have enabled Blair to adeptly tackle complex international challenges.
I think that adaptation is an innate quality one has to have. And certainly there are some cultures that are easier to adapt to than others, and one should never underestimate that. It's not just a simple problem with a simple solution. And so there have been cultures I have found myself more comfortable with, and some I've been less comfortable with. And I always try to understand where the source of the discomfort is. Is it something that I simply am not understanding, or is it something that I may not agree with, the principles that are being exhibited in that culture? And so the key is to have an internal stable frame of reference for what one's own values and principles are, but make allowances for the others and recognize that that is their culture. That's the way they do things. And when you're in their country, you adapt to accept that, and you try to work across the culture and build those bridges that we talked about. And that can also be the case internally if one has a team where one might have remote employees that are from different countries or different cultures, and one has to be sensitive to their expectations in terms of time, in terms of effort, in terms of compensation, in terms of, other values that they may hold dear. And so it's not a top-down management philosophy that one can really just command and control. One has to be collaborative, and one has to be understanding. And one has to, in certain cultures, one does have to demonstrate authority and leadership. Otherwise, one will not get the cooperation one's looking for. So it's a question of having a toolbox with many tools in it and being able to apply the right tool in the right situation.
Blair is a seasoned international expert, and his empathetic understanding coupled with adaptability has enabled him to deeply understand various cultures. Let's listen to some interesting stories from Blair about what he's learned from his experiences with international cultures.
One of the companies I worked for was headquartered in the Netherlands. And that company I began to work for immediately following my time in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, and the cultures were entirely different. In the Netherlands, it's a very business-focused discussion, and whereas in the Middle East, the communication styles are very indirect. In the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, you learn a lot more from what people are not saying, from what they actually do say. You listen for the things they are not mentioning. Whereas in the Netherlands, it's a virtue in their culture to be honest, to be upfront, and to tell the truth no matter if it's perceived as negative or not. And that adaptation was significant in my case, going between the two cultures so close to each other. I had to learn that comments directed at me in the Netherlands company were not necessarily personal. They were just feeling that it's important to tell the truth. For example, one example you will hear in intercultural conversations is they will feel very comfortable coming up to their close friend and saying, that color really does not look good on you. It doesn't look good at all. Whereas in other cultures, that would be an insult, and you would be expected to say something positive, even no matter what you thought. So very big difference in cultural communication, direct versus indirect styles. Also, the way authority is exercised. In some cultures, there is a power distance feature, which means the person in charge is not supposed to socialize or mingle with their subordinates or their employees, because that implies weakness. It implies lack of leadership. Whereas, again, in the Netherlands, it's the opposite. People are inclusive of all levels, and it's considered acceptable for an employee to be directly critical of their manager and to call them out in a meeting and say that what you've just said is not true or something like that. So again, totally different concepts of what's called power distance and direct versus indirect communication. Those are just two examples from my experience.
Blair noted that in some cultures, criticism is more common than in others. As a person with a feeling-oriented approach, how does he handle criticism and the negative feelings that can arise from these cultural differences?
Well, in that case, you have to recognize how much of the criticism is a cultural context and how much of it might be personally merited based on my own behavior. And so it's good to have some distance, some ability to sort of step back from the situation and have an internal frame of reference. In my case, one thing that's helped me with that is I've practiced forms of meditation my entire life, which have given me a sort of introspective ability to go within myself and understand what my values are, what my principles are, and compare that to the situation I'm in. And in that case, I can decide whether the criticism is real or whether it's just some context that I'm in that doesn't relate to me personally.
Towards the end of our interview, Blair also reviewed a personal hobby that has played a role in shaping his leadership style.
Of course, the international travel piece, I can't overemphasize that is one of the most helpful ways to expand one's thinking and one's boundaries in terms of understanding culture and understanding how to grow and how to develop.
Thanks for being with us today on Leadership from Within. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to empower your leadership journey. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to subscribe and share it with others. And remember, if you have any specific questions about leadership, we're just an email away. See you in the next one.